All right, so we are looking at Hellenism today, my cherubs. I'm recording this obviously for posterity's sake for anyone who is not here for the lecture. So our objective today is to look at Hellenism. What is it? And to see how it happened. All right, so this is the Hellenistic world that we have here. Greece, Egypt, Asia Minor, Mesopotamia, the Holy Land, Persia, even modern-day Pakistan, which is historical India. Yes, Alicia, darling. I'm not going and presenting. Thank you, dear. Is that what you're about to say?
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Totally lame-o. I'm like going and pointing at the map and like showing you stuff, and none of you can see any of it. Sorry. All right. So one of the things that Alexander does is he brings a huge number of different kinds of peoples together. As we talked about with number 4, as he built those Alexandrias all over his empire, and Greeks moved to those and then met local people and got married. We have a combination of cultures with Greek and Egyptian, Greek Syrian, Greek Persian, Greek Indian. Is really kind of amazing. Now, when we started discussing Alexander the Great, one of the things that I asked us to be thinking about, and we'll ask ourselves this question probably tomorrow, is was Alexander truly great? Does he deserve the moniker? And, we talked about his military conquests, how he never lost a battle. We talked about how his men loved him because he would endure trials and tribulations with them, and how when they said, let's turn around, he did. One of the things that people often attribute with his quote-unquote greatness is the fact that he spread Greek culture, the Hellenism. One of the things we have to think about, though, is was that really his goal? Probably not. We think his goal was just to conquer as much as it can. So what often people go and liken this to is, in archery, Haley, she shoots a bow and arrow at a target, and she gets a bullseye by hitting right in the middle. But many people say, well, it's kind of more like Alexander. He shot the arrow, and then Avery came back and drew the bullseye around wherever Alexander shot. And they say, oh, he's so great. He spread Greek culture, did all this. But did he really intend to? So what did Alexander do? Like we said for our number 4, he built cities and said, go. Move here. We need people. We need the best of people. We need our architects, our engineers, our philosophers, our artists, people to do government. And they moved to those cities. The cities, their main language was Greek, despite, being in India or being in present-day Afghanistan or being in, in Mesopotamia. And they married the locals. So now we have all of this intermarriage going and a blending of people. Now, I have a question. What would be advantages for Greek being a language spoken throughout this entire region? Because although it might look small to us on a map, this is an incredibly large amount. Like we said, Alexander built the largest empire the world had seen at this point. So what is the advantage of Greek being spoken all the way from, Athens to the Indus and to Egypt and everything in between? How would that help people or make things better for people? Come on, guys. How would having one language that could be understood from one end to the other be helpful?
So that everyone could communicate?
Okay, so communication is going to be much easier. Very good. And because you can communicate, what also is going to be easier, Caleb?
If you can actually communicate better than like traveling and going around to different places, like when you're going to, or maybe when you're like going to some place to maybe conquer it, that like you would know like the language.
Okay, so communication, travel would be easier. I'm thinking of another T word as well. And we talk a lot.
Transportation.
Trade.
Mariah's got it. Trade. Good, good, good. I would love it if people did the standard, just like Caleb did, of raising their hand. But I do appreciate your guys' enthusiasm and awesomeness. Thank you. Yeah, trade is going to be much easier through this. One of the things we actually already talked about, we talked about the Septuagint in our last. We talked about the Hebrews and the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, which is going to wind up going and spreading monotheism through a lot of this, which something that we can attribute to, well, it wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for Alexander the Great, but not something that Alexander the Great really, directly met. So all of these combined cultures speaking Greek winds up creating what we call Hellenism. And as we talked about, many of these cities created are going to be named Alexandria. Now, much like how the Persians ruled, typically these Alexandrias were ruled by native peoples, the native culture. So the Alexandrias that were in Afghanistan or historical India, modern day Pakistan, or in modern day Iran, or in, the Holy Land, those places, they were ruled by locals from them, but they spoke Greek. We see that their cultures were respected, but winds up going and mixing in with the Greek. So we're going to wind up seeing Greek temples being created. We're going to wind up seeing, Greek theaters being built, because often, like I had said, these are going to be all modeled off of Athens, Greece. Now, just to let you know, typically when people talk about Alexandria, even though we know Alexander made like a ton of them, they're referring to Alexandria, Egypt, which we're about to look at now. So we mentioned yesterday how Alexandria is going to be a super important city, and how Egypt is going to be ruled by a man named Ptolemy with that silent P in his name. And of course, he took power because he stole Alexander the Great's body in his funeral processions, because Egyptian tradition said that the next pharaoh had to have the body of the other pharaoh, part of the burial. So just as a little steal-a-rooney of a dead body, oh boy, sounds like fun, and then winds up being the ruler. And he's actually going to be the person who makes Alexandria, Egypt, awesome. This painting here, and it's even in the Mr. Nicky song. This is Alexander the Great apparently directing where the Library of Alexandria should be, but this is completely false. Ptolemy is like, hey, we're going to build the most amazing library ever, guys. Alexander was long dead. And also, it winds up being one of the busiest trade cities in the world. There are 2 harbors at Alexandria, and everyone is going there to trade. All of the known world's goods are going through Alexandria. So if Oren wants something special from somewhere far away, he can go to Alexandria to get it. If Madeline Kate wants to sell something to millions of people, she sells it in Alexandria. So this winds up going and being a great place for trade. It also winds up being a center for learning. So that library I mentioned is created. It had the largest repository of information that the world had seen at this point, and it's really cool. So if, for example, if Kaylin went to Alexandria, she hopped on a ship. As she's getting off the ship, they'd say, do you have any books to report or scrolls? And she'd say, oh yeah, I've got this Babysitter's Club right here. I've got this dictionary, and I have my diary. And the people at Alexandria, they would take all 3 of those books that Kaylin had, would go copy them down word for word, keep the originals, and then give Kaylin the copies, just in case if they made a mistake when they, copied something down. And they did that for everyone entering the city. So we see in this picture here, this artist rendition, because unfortunately, we don't know what the library looked like inside. It burned down to the ground. But all throughout, there were millions of scrolls and books and texts that they went and copied and had. Yes, Austin, sir.
How was it burned down? And why was it burned down?
There's some debate about this, and you'll even find people going and having different dates, like by hundreds of years when it was burned down. I tend to believe that it was burned down during I believe, the second or third crusade, in between the second and third crusade. The Fatimid army, I believe, was conquering and then accidentally set the library on fire. From what I understand, it was a complete accident. But yeah, it's kind of one of those really super sad things. Whereas I see this one right here when I Google it, because you hear the story about it burning down while Saladin was ruling. It says 275 AD, which is 100 years before that. there was a rebellion. Oh, I see why they're saying it, because there was a daughter library, the Serapeum, that did last, and that probably was then destroyed during that crusade. But then here we go. We have this source saying in 48 BC under Caesar. So that's one of the crazy things. Like literally in a Google, I found, 3 different things talking about the burning of the Library of Alexandria. So I guess it's one of those, we don't truly know how it happened or why. But it's a super duper
We have
bummer
to
with all this
estimate.
information. Well, yeah,
We have
but
to
they're off by
estimate a
hundreds of
date.
years. The one I first mentioned was 1,000 years prior to the one that the first Google spot hit, which was 200 years before the next part that it just said. So kind of confusing and weird, but filled with information, things that were lost forever. And people would go and study from all over the Hellenistic world and be here because of all the information. It also winds up being a center of culture. We have museums and palaces and monuments all over the place. It winds up being a really kind of amazing place to be at. So, how does life change under the Hellenistic world? Well, first off, those city-states are gone. It's ruled by kingdoms now, which makes sense because now a king rules all those places. One of the positives that we have is we see more rights being given to women. Sparta was very progressive with its amount of rights to girls, whereas Athens was kind of backward. And we're going to see things like evened out throughout the empire. Women get more rights, they get education, can own property. But please don't mistake that this is going to wind up being fair. I mean, the sad truth is that women can still argue today that it's still not completely equitable or fair, which is totally dumb and a bummer. One of the other things that we see, though, interestingly enough, too, is women start becoming the focus on art. Well, I should say are more often a subject in art and not necessarily the focus. Whereas prior to Alexander and his conquest, most of the art was based on dudes. And most of the literature was based on gods and mythology. Now, we'll still have things like Jason and the Argonauts being written during this time, but a lot of the writings actually wind up turning to everyday life with regular people for the literature. Athens is still going to be the place to go for theater with the comedies and tragedies. A lot more comedies will be written at this time, so we're going to have some good stuff being created. And as I mentioned earlier, when these cities are being built or fixed up, they're going to take Athens, Greece as the model for their creation, kind of as the ideal set. Here's just some art being created. This is actually a mask used in theater, because remember they would go and have these exaggerated masks. And here is a picture from the film of Jason and the Argonauts that was made when I was a kid or right before I was born. It's a cool story. All right, now we get to some great people in this time and some of the crazy, awesome things that they figured out. So
We talked about both of those people.
Good. Yeah, they're going to wind up doing a lot with math and geometry. Some of you, I think Mariah mentioned that she already knew the Pythagorean theorem, and that's stuff that you guys are going to be working on with mathematics. Aristophanes, he's going to be amazing. This dude, by looking at the sky, is going to be able to accurately estimate the size of the world. It's like literally, he's looking at the sun, the moon, the stars, things like that, and he figures out the size of the world. I mean, how do you even do that? He doesn't have a telescope. He doesn't have a computer. He just has his brain. It's incredible. Incredible.
When we since we figured out how big the world is, was he really close to what it is now?
Yeah, I'm trying to look up his actual percentage, but it's like extremely close. Yeah. So he was off by like a very small percentage. It's kind of incredible. Like just from looking at the sky. I think his main thing was he looked at looking at the horizon too and how far you could see. Archimedes is going to be one of my very favorites. He was a physicist and an inventor. There's the great Eureka story where the king is like, hey, how do I know if my crown is real or not? And Archimedes is like, I don't know. They look the same. And he's like sitting in the bath one day. And
we talked about that last year.
Yes. Oh, I love it.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
And then I remember the give me a lever and a place to stand and I can lift the whole earth up.
And I know Archimedes is so stinking cool. Yeah. Oh, Archimedes is the best. I love, it's just like me though. Sometimes I get some of my best ideas in the shower and he's like in the bath. He's like, I solved it. I move water when I sit in there. And he goes test with the crown and some iron balls and stuff like that. Hipparchus, he's going to be cool. He's going to go talk about the solar movement. Yeah, he says Eureka when he figures it out. Perfect. Going to say, oh yeah, the stars, planets, this is how they move. I mean, of course, figuring out this stuff wouldn't, like, still today, there are like some people are like, the earth is flat. It's like, no, like the Greeks, like 2,000 years ago were like, dummy, no, it's round and this is how it works.
The earth was flat it was actually just a joke, like to mess with people. But then people actually
believed it.
Yeah, they took it seriously.
And they used Minecraft for an example.
Yeah, it's just craziness. We got Hippocrates, which we've talked about Hippocrates so much. If you don't know about the Hippocratic Oath, Divine's going to defenestrate you, okay? What's up, Samuel? All right. Now, Hypatia, she's one of my favorites. She was someone that the Wax Museum was really great for. She was a girl, hence me saying she, mathematician and astronomer who winds up figuring out a lot of really complex mathematics stuff, too. She was also a philosopher, too. I mean, she's pretty talented. But then we get to my favorite, probably because he has the coolest name ever, Hero of Alexandria. And now, so today we take for granted a lot of things that we have, but we think he might have made the world's first steam engine, for Pete's sakes. Now, steam engine, like I'm talking, it was like the 1600s in England when they started using the steam engine. And here he is in the BCs going and figuring out how to work with steam. Like, you know how we walk in the supermarket and there's automatic doors? Yeah, writing suggests that he created the first like automatic doors using steam and stuff like that. Now, it wasn't very practical, so it didn't wind up getting put into use, but just wild kind of things like that. So this is a pretty incredible time of thoughts and ideas going through. All right, my cherubs, that is our notes for the day. I'm stopping the recording.